fame, fortune, and the dazzling glow of Hollywood's golden lights, it all looked perfect. But for so many of its brightest stars, the dream was poisoned by the bottle. Behind the glamorous smiles were nights of loneliness, battles with addiction, and lives that ended far too soon. In this video, you'll discover the tragic stories of 10 legendary stars who seemed untouchable on screen, but were broken in private. And stay with me until the very end, because the last story may be the most heartbreaking and shocking of them all. Number 1, Errol Flynn. To the world, he was the swashbuckling hero, the man who leapt across ships, clashed swords, and kissed danger like it was written in the script. But off the screen, Errol Flynn wasn't just acting the part of a pirate, he was living it. By the 1930s and 40s, Flynn was Hollywood's golden rogue, a man who carried both charm and chaos wherever he went. But behind the grin and velvet voice was a glass that never seemed too empty. He didn't just drink, he devoured. Flynn's Malibu estate, shared with fellow actor David Niven, was so drenched in parties and whiskey that it earned a grim nickname, Cirrhosis by the Sea. What started as a joke turned into prophecy. He had ways of sneaking alcohol into every corner of his life. Vodka-soaked oranges on film sets, doctors who came not with medicine, but with bottles wrapped like prescriptions. He once bet a co-star $500 he could drink him under the table between takes. He won the bet, but lost far more in the process. As time went on, the bottle took its toll. His face aged faster than his years. Directors grew tired of reshoots, of slurred lines, of waiting for him to be steady enough to stand. His once legendary energy now came with shaking hands and a body that betrayed him. Financial troubles mounted. His star power dimmed. And yet, he kept pouring another glass. In 1959, at just 50 years old, Errol Flynn's body finally gave out. The autopsy read like a warning to anyone who thought themselves invincible. Cirrhosis of the liver, heart disease, and a long list of broken parts. His legend may have seemed larger than life, but his end was painfully human. And still, Hollywood mythology gave him a farewell in character. At his burial, 6 bottles of his favorite whiskey were placed beside him. Some said it was a cruel joke. Others whispered it was the most fitting tribute. Because for Errol Flynn, the drink was the one co-star that never walked away. His legacy remains split down the middle. The daring, magnetic rogue who set the screen on fire, and the man who, behind the curtain, was slowly consumed by the very bottle that made his legend shimmer. Errol Flynn lived like a storm, burned out too fast, and left the world with both a legend and a warning. 2. Frank Sinatra. Number 2. Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, the voice that melted nightclubs, packed stadiums, and won the heights of millions. To the world, Sinatra was untouchable, a man who could charm presidents, terrify rivals, and control every room he walked into without ever breaking a sweat. But for all his talent, Frank carried one companion that never left his side, a glass of Jack Daniels. Sinatra's love for Jack wasn't a phase. It was ritual. 4 ice cubes, 2 fingers of whiskey, a splash of water. The drink was his signature, the invisible rhythm beneath the music. He drank before lunch, he drank after dinner, and he held court in smoky lounges until sunrise. his voice smooth, his laugh sharp, his temper waiting just beneath the surface. Because here's the truth about Sinatra: the bottle fueled both sides of him. It gave him warmth, generosity, the charm of a king entertaining his kingdom. But it also sparked the rage, the side that shoved reporters, cut off old friends, and launched tirades at anyone who said the wrong thing at the wrong time. Those closest to him used to say you never knew which Frank you were getting, the gracious host or the storm behind the blue eyes. And yet, he was never sloppy, never the caricature of a drunk. He was sharp, controlled, even dangerous. That was the trick of Sinatra's drinking. It was constant, but it was cloaked in style. He could be on his third glass, his fifth, maybe his 10th, and still carry himself like he owned the room. Which, of course, he usually did. Unlike so many others, Sinatra never had the great fall. No breakdown in public, no tragic collapse that ended his career. He simply kept going. Through decades of heavy drinking, through stormy friendships and broken romances, through health issues that could have stopped lesser men, he sang into his 70s. He toured, he recorded, he lived the myth he had built for himself. And when his time finally came, in 1998, Sinatra was sent off the same way he had lived, dressed in a blue suit, buried with a bottle of Jack Daniels tucked lovingly at his side. Some said it was a joke. Others said it was the most honest piece of his legacy. Because Frank Sinatra didn't just sing songs that defined an era. He lived like a man chasing something the music alone couldn't give him. Maybe it was peace. Maybe it was escape. Whatever it was, he took it to the grave with a glass in hand, a legend at his back, and a voice that will never be silenced. Before we move on, if you're fascinated by these hidden Hollywood stories, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've got even more untold tales of stars whose lives behind the cameras were nothing like the image on screen. And don't forget to give this video a like. It helps keep these forgotten stories alive. Number 3, Elizabeth Taylor. To the world, she was royalty. Violet eyes that could silence a room. Diamonds the size of ice cubes. Gowns that shimmered under every flashbulb. She wasn't just a star. She was Hollywood's crown jewel. But behind the glitter and the luxury, Elizabeth Taylor was unraveling, glass by glass, pill by pill. By the time she turned 50, Elizabeth had already lived through 7 marriages. More public scandals than most stars could survive, and more hospitalizations than anyone cared to count. The world saw the glamour, but behind the doors of her mansion, she often couldn't face her own reflection without a drink in hand. Champagne at breakfast, vodka hidden in the pocket of her dressing gown, whispered arguments with herself before she stepped onto a set. Frangs spoke of her waking up in a haze, not remembering where she was or why she was there. Health problems mounted, marriages crumbled, and even her legendary fame began to feel fragile, like something built on sand. She was living proof that even the brightest star could be swallowed by the shadows. And then came a moment no one expected. In 1983, Elizabeth Taylor did what no major Hollywood icon had ever dared to do. She checked herself into the Betty Ford Clinic. This wasn't a fading star trying to cling to the spotlight. This was Elizabeth Taylor, the most glamorous woman alive, admitting she was powerless against addiction. The world gasped, headlines screamed, but Taylor didn't flinch. Her stay wasn't easy. She fought, she relapsed, she went back again, And then she helped others do the same. The woman who had once been known only for her beauty became something far more powerful, a symbol of resilience. She dragged her demons into the light and showed millions that seeking help wasn't shameful, it was survival. Elizabeth Taylor didn't just save herself, she cracked Hollywood's silence about addiction. She helped destigmatize treatment at a time when no one else dared to speak about it. She became a beacon for recovery, using her fame not to hide her flaws, but to guide others out of theirs. In the end, she proved that survival was its own kind of beauty. Elizabeth Taylor didn't let the bottle define her story. She rewrote it in courage, in honesty, and in resilience. And that may be the most dazzling legacy of all. Number 4, Montgomery Clift. In the golden age of Hollywood, Montgomery Clift was something new. He wasn't a polished matinee idol like Cary Grant, nor a larger-than-life figure like John Wayne. Clift brought something raw, something real. With his quiet intensity and haunted eyes, he made audiences believe every word, every pause, every flicker of doubt. He was called the first of the method actors, a man who lived inside his roles and left pieces of himself on the screen. But in 1956, everything changed. After leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, Clift's car slammed into a telephone pole. The wreck nearly killed him. His jaw was shattered, his nose broken, his body mangled. Elizabeth Taylor herself raced to the scene, pulling broken teeth from his throat so he wouldn't choke to death. He survived, but the man who woke up was never the same. The studio tried to repair his face. Surgeons worked tirelessly, but the damage could not be erased. The once flawless features that had made him Hollywood's brightest young star were now marked, stiff, and haunted. But the deeper wounds weren't on his skin. They were inside. Pain became his constant companion, and with it came the bottle. Alcohol numbed what medicine could not. Pills followed, chasing the agony into darker corners. Friends spoke of a man slipping away before their eyes. Where once he had been magnetic and alive, now he was withdrawn, trembling, lost in shadows. Yet even in the midst of his unraveling, Clift delivered some of the most powerful performances of his career. In films like Judgment at Nuremberg and The Misfits, you can see it, the brilliance still burning, but also the torment just beneath the surface. Hollywood whispered about him. They called him the longest suicide in history, watching as the car crash became less an accident and more a slow descent. By the age of 45, Montgomery Clift was gone, found alone in his New York apartment. No great farewell, no red carpet tributes. Just a man who had once lit the screen with fire, now extinguished by the weight of pain, addiction, and silence. Today, Clift is remembered not only for the roles that changed acting forever, but also for the tragedy of a man too sensitive for the world he was forced to live in. His story is both inspiration and warning, proof that genius often walks hand in hand with heartbreak. Number 5, Peter O'Toole. If there was ever a man who seemed to live as hard as the characters he played, it was Peter O'Toole. Tall, lean, with piercing blue eyes that could burn through the screen, he was unforgettable in Lawrence of Arabia. A performance so powerful it etched his name permanently into Hollywood history. But O'Toole wasn't just acting larger than life. Off-screen, he was doing it for real. He wasn't just a drinker, he was a legend of drinking. O'Toole's nights out became folklore. He drank with Richard Burton, challenged Oliver Reed, matched Richard Harris pint for pint, and still stood long after others had fallen. Pubs across London and Dublin still whisper stories of O'Toole climbing onto tables, breaking into songs, or vanishing into the night, only to reappear in another country the next morning. The man lived as if hangovers were for mortals, and he was something else entirely. But no one cheats the bottle forever. By the 1970s, his body began to rebel. Years of heavy drinking caught up with him. He suffered from pancreatitis so severe that doctors told him flatly, "Stop or die." He didn't listen at first. O'Toole, stubborn and defiant, said that alcohol had given him some of the best nights of his life. Yet, as hospital visits grew more frequent, he finally pulled back. Not entirely, but just enough to survive. And survive he did. O'Toole carried on, thin and gaunt, but still aflame with wit and brilliance. He returned to the stage and screen, delivering performances that reminded the world why he was one of the finest actors of his generation. His career became a balancing act, one foot in the gutter, the other on a stage receiving standing ovations. Despite his excesses, O'Toole amassed an astonishing record: 8 Academy Award nominations, the most for any actor never to win. Hollywood eventually gave him an honorary Oscar. Though true to form, he nearly turned it down, saying he was still in the game and might yet win one properly. He never did, but by then, it hardly mattered. His legend was bigger than any statue. In the end, Peter O'Toole lived to the age of 81, outlasting nearly all of his drinking companions. He received a knighthood, countless tributes, and the eternal respect of audiences who saw in him not just a great actor, but a man who lived fully, recklessly, gloriously on his own terms. O'Toole once said he had a simple philosophy: it's not life that's short, it's youth. And so he lived as if he could stay young forever, defying the years, the warnings, even death itself, until death finally claimed him. But by then, Peter O'Toole had already given the world his immortality. Number 6, Ava Gardner. She was the woman who could silence a room simply by walking into it. With her dark hair, smoldering eyes, and raw, untamed beauty, Ava Gardner was the ultimate femme fatale of Hollywood's golden age. Men adored her, women envied her, and studios struggled to control her. But Ava Gardner was never the kind of woman anyone could own. Not lovers, not producers, not even Hollywood itself. Behind that striking beauty was a fire, a defiance that refused to bend to rules or expectations. She lived on her own terms, and with that came a lifestyle as wild as her reputation. Ava drank the way she lived, unapologetically, boldly, and without restraint. Stories of her arriving on set with a glass in hand were not just gossip, they were routine. Whiskey before lines, champagne after takes, late nights that bled into early mornings. For Ava, drinking wasn't a vice, it was part of her freedom. And yet that freedom came at a price. Her marriages to Mickey Rooney, Artie Shaw, and Frank Sinatra were stormy, passionate, and destructive. Each relationship burned bright but ended in ashes, leaving Ava to pick up the pieces with another drink in her hand. Friends said she carried heartbreak like a shadow, always close, always heavy, even when she smiled. By the 1960s, Ava's film career had begun to fade. She was still magnetic, still glamorous, but the roles became fewer, the offers smaller. Hollywood has never been kind to women who age, no matter how dazzling their beauty once was. Ava turned increasingly to drink as her screen presence dimmed, finding solace in the glass when the spotlight no longer burned so brightly. Her later years were marked by both illness and resilience. Strokes weakened her body, but not her spirit. Even as her health declined, Ava Gardner remained fiercely herself, witty, sharp-tongued, and unwilling to apologize for the way she had lived. She once famously said, "I either write the book or sell the jewels, and I'm kinda short on jewels." When money grew tight, she did exactly that, penning her memoirs with the same candor that defined her entire life. In 1990, Ava Gardner died at the age of 67, but she left the world exactly as she had lived in it, on her own terms. No apologies, no regrets, just the lasting impression of a woman who refused to let anyone tell her who to be. Ava Gardner remains more than just an actress. She's a symbol of independence, of fiery passion, of the cost and the glory of living without compromise. To the very end, she was unapologetically Ava. Number 7, Judy Garland. She was just a little girl when Hollywood claimed her. Frances Gumm, the name she was born with, was only 13 years old when MGM signed her, renamed her Judy Garland, and began shaping her into their perfect star. She was small, wide-eyed, and bursting with a voice that seemed far too big for her tiny frame. That voice would one day become one of the most beloved in the world. But behind the songs, behind the rainbow, there was always the shadow of control. The studio never let Judy simply be a child. They put her on grueling schedules, forcing her to work long days, sometimes 18 hours at a stretch. When she was tired, they gave her pills to keep her awake. When she couldn't sleep, they gave her pills to knock her out. And when she worried about her weight, they controlled every bite she ate. Judy was told she wasn't pretty enough, not thin enough, not perfect enough. So they built her into what they wanted, and she paid the price. By the time The Wizard of Oz made her an icon at just 16 years old, Judy was already addicted to the pills MGM had fed her. Alcohol soon followed, becoming both her escape and her undoing. Off-screen, she was fragile, insecure, desperate for love and stability, but Hollywood had given her none of those things. Instead, she became trapped in a cycle of work, exhaustion, pills, and pain. And yet, despite it all, Judy Garland shone. She made audiences believe in magic. She could walk on a stage, open her mouth, and silence the world with a single note. Her concerts in the 1950s and 60s became legendary, not just because of her voice, but because of the way she gave all of herself to the crowd. Even when she was trembling, even when she was broken, she still gave everything. But behind the curtain, her life was crumbling. Marriages collapsed. Finances were a constant disaster. With Judy often swindled, exploited, or left nearly penniless. Her health deteriorated. The addiction grew worse. Hollywood, which had built her, now stood by and watched her fall. In 1969, Judy Garland was only 47 years old when she died in London from an accidental overdose. It was the tragic final act of a life spent under relentless pressure, manipulation, and exploitation. The little girl who once dreamed of somewhere over the rainbow never truly found her way there. And yet, Judy Garland's legacy is eternal. She is remembered not for her suffering, but for her brilliance, for that aching voice that could make the world stop and listen, for the courage she showed even when she had none left to give. Judy's story is one of heartbreak, yes, but it is also one of resilience, of light breaking through even the darkest storms. Her life was short, her pain immeasurable, but her gift was forever. Number 8, Richard Burton. Few men in Hollywood history carried such a voice, such a presence, such an aura of dangerous brilliance as Richard Burton. Born in the coal mining valleys of Wales, he rose from poverty with a voice like thunder, a gift for Shakespeare, and a charisma that could light up both stage and screen. He was hailed as one of the greatest actors of his generation, and yet, for all his talent, Burton was a man at war with himself. That war was fought, glass after glass, with vodka. Burton's drinking was legendary, even in an era when heavy drinking was practically an Olympic sport among actors. Where others sipped, he devoured. Where others slowed down, he accelerated. He was known to consume up to 2 or even 3 bottles of vodka a day. Colleagues marveled at his ability to walk onto a stage, deliver Shakespeare's most complex soliloquies flawlessly, and then collapse backstage, the alcohol still coursing through his veins. ... And then there was Elizabeth Taylor. Together they became the most famous couple in the world and one of the most volatile. Their love affair was as intoxicating as it was destructive. They married not once, but twice. They fought in public, reconciled in private, and drank enough between them to keep the tabloids in business for decades. Friends described their relationship as a tempest, passionate, explosive, and impossible to contain. Burton himself once admitted, "You can't keep clapping a couple of sticks of dynamite together without expecting them to blow up." And blow up they did, again and again. Burton's brilliance, however, was undeniable. He was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, starred in epics like Cleopatra and Beckett, and delivered stage performances that critics still whisper about today. His Shakespearean work, especially his Hamlet, was hailed as one of the greatest interpretations of all time. That booming voice, trained in the Welsh valleys, carried both power and poetry. On screen, he could be regal and brutal, tender and terrifying, sometimes all in the same scene. But the drink never let go. Burton himself admitted he was an alcoholic, but even self-awareness couldn't break the grip. He would dry out briefly, sometimes under Elizabeth Taylor's pressure, sometimes on his own, but always returned to the bottle. It eroded his health, scarred his liver, and weakened his heart. By the 1970s, he was visibly worn, still magnetic, still brilliant, but diminished. In 1984, Richard Burton died of a cerebral hemorrhage in Switzerland at the age of 58. Though his official cause of death was not listed as alcoholism, it was well understood that decades of heavy drinking had destroyed his health and hastened his end. At his funeral, the world mourned a man who had burned so brightly and yet burned out far too soon. And perhaps that is the tragedy of Richard Burton, a man of staggering gifts who could command kings, conquerors, and poets on stage, but could not conquer himself. His love with Elizabeth Taylor remains one of Hollywood's most infamous romances, a story of fire and ruin that still fascinates today. Richard Burton once wrote in his diaries, "I have no life but love and drink." And in the end, it was both that made him unforgettable and both that destroyed him. Number 9, Mary Astor. She was born Lucille Langhanke, the daughter of strict German immigrants, but the world would come to know her as Mary Astor, one of Hollywood's great beauties of the 1920s and 30s. With her deep eyes and refined features, she was often cast as the sophisticated woman, the alluring presence just beyond reach. On screen, she was elegance itself, but off-screen, Mary Astor's life was tangled with scandal, heartbreak, and a struggle with the bottle that would follow her until her final years. The scandal that haunted her forever began in 1936. Mary was embroiled in a bitter custody battle with her ex-husband over their young daughter. During the trial, her private diary was exposed, a journal in which she had written candidly, sometimes shockingly, about her love affairs with some of the most powerful men in Hollywood and beyond. Suddenly, Mary Astor wasn't just an actress, she was front-page news. The press branded her a fallen woman, a scandalous figure, a mother unfit to raise her child. The scandal should have destroyed her career, and for a time, it nearly did. But Mary Astor was resilient. She weathered the storm, continued to work, and even achieved some of her greatest artistic triumphs in the years that followed. She gave unforgettable performances in classics like Dodsworth and the Maltese Falcon, and in 1941, she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in The Great Lie. For a moment, it seemed she had silenced the whispers, but the shame of that diary never truly left her. Hollywood has a long memory for scandal, especially for women, and Mary often felt she was working under a shadow. With the pressures of stardom, the sting of public humiliation, and the pain of failed marriages, she increasingly turned to alcohol for comfort. The glass became her refuge, her shield against loneliness and regret. As the years passed, the roles grew fewer, the spotlight dimmer. By the 1950s, Mary Astor's drinking had become impossible to hide. Friends spoke of her appearing on set unsteady, her once regal presence clouded by exhaustion and haze. She spent time in clinics, drying out, returning to work, then falling again into the same destructive cycle. Her final film appearance came in 1964's Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, alongside Bette Davis. But by then, her health had been ravaged. She lived her later years in relative quiet, away from the glamour of Hollywood, but still haunted by the echoes of her past. Mary Astor died in 1987 at the age of 81. Her career remembered for brilliance, but her life remembered for both triumph and tragedy. She remains a symbol of how quickly Hollywood could turn, how one scandal could follow a woman forever, and how even great success could not silence the private battles fought behind closed doors. Mary Astor's story is not just about the fall, it is about the fight. A woman who endured shame, who reached the highest peaks of her profession, and who, despite her struggles, left behind performances that will never be forgotten. Number 10, Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton was once the very definition of a Hollywood dream. Blonde, stunning, and brimming with confidence, she arrived in Los Angeles with the looks and the ambition to take her straight to the top. And for a brief, their rivalry over Barbara turned brutal when Neil beat Tone so savagely that he was left with a broken nose, a shattered cheekbone, and brain injuries. The tabloids feasted on the story, and Barbara Payton was branded not as a starlet, but as a scandal. The studios turned their backs on her. Offers dried up almost overnight. And then the spiral began. With her career gone, Barbara sank deeper into alcohol and drugs, once photographed in glamorous gowns on red carpets. She was soon seen staggering through Hollywood streets, often broke, sometimes begging for money. She sold interviews about her own downfall just to survive, confessing openly to prostitution, to addiction, to a life stripped of its promises. In 1963, she published a memoir titled I Am Not Ashamed. In its pages, she revealed the brutal truth of her life, the Hollywood machine that used her and cast her aside, and the choices that led her down a road of ruin. But even in that honesty, there was despair. Barbara had become a living symbol of Hollywood's cruelty, the way it chewed up women once worshipped as goddesses and discarded them the moment they stumbled. In 1967, Barbara Payton died of heart and liver failure at only 39 years old. She had once stood beside Hollywood's most powerful men, a blonde beauty ticked to be one of the greats. But she left the world alone, in poverty. Her body broken by alcohol and drugs. Her story is one of the most haunting of them all. Barbara Payton was not the first star destroyed by fame, and she would not be the last. But her fall from red carpets to guttered streets remains one of the starkest reminders of how brutal the Hollywood dream can be. Barbara Payton's life ended far too soon, yet in her tragic honesty, in her refusal to hide the wreckage of her life, she left behind more than scandal. She left a warning, a mirror held up to an industry that creates illusions, but all too often destroys the people who make them. And there you have it, 10 stars who lit up Hollywood's brightest screens, but paid the darkest price. From Errol Flynn's pirate life that ended with a glass in his hand, to Barbara Payton's heartbreaking fall from red carpets to poverty. Each story is a reminder of the fragile line between fame and destruction. These weren't just actors. They were people carrying burdens, addictions, and heartbreaks that the cameras never showed. Their talent made them legends, but their struggles made them human. If you found yourself moved by these stories, don't let them fade away. Hit that like button to keep this history alive and subscribe for more untold Hollywood tales. And tell me in the comments, which of these stars' stories hit you the hardest? Because behind the glamour, behind the fame, lies the truth of Hollywood. The light is dazzling, but the shadows are unforgettable.